Welcome into a new edition of Going Deep Buffalo on the Built-in Buffalo Network. I'm your host today, Kevin Misseri, here with special guest Lance Nelson. Got some OTAs and some mandatory minicamp stuff to break down, some long-term vision plans, what's going to happen in the defensive side of the ball, how is this retooled receiving core going to look, all that, and some of the press conference notes and more right here on the top of the hour. But first and foremost, we'd like to thank our show sponsors, the Summit Center and Larson Timko Funeral Home and Dave Dengler. Lance, how you doing today?
Doing well now that I can hear you. These things are good. So appreciate you having me. It's kind of short notice here, but I always appreciate coming on with everyone in the brand. So
it's your second time on this in the last few weeks.
yeah,
Last time with Kevin, this time with me. So we'll have to see how that all plays out. But been a busy week for Bills. At least Bills on the field. It's going to be the last time we see the Bills here until training camp. So, kind of our last glimpse of what may come from this Bills roster, where there may be some deficiencies. So it's going to be very, very interesting to break down. So I'm going to leave you at the top of the hour, Lance. What do you think you take away? I mean, there are a lot of players spoke. We got Taylor Rapp speaking. Basically, Sean McDermott saying that Taylor Rapp, safety job is his. We'll see who plays next to him. That was a pretty interesting comment that cements him, based on his contract, cements him in the starter spot. But I want to kind of start there on the defensive side of the ball. What are your takeaways from, what looks to be a revamped safety unit with Taylor Rapp? Do you think that, who's going to take Mike Edwards has been hurt pretty much the entire preseason. That doesn't mean a ton as we head into training camp. But I guess kind of tell me your kind of vision. You got Kyer Elam, like your vision of this new defensive backfield.
yeah, I was super pumped to hear that Kyer was playing well. He's certainly going to get plenty of chances there with, Razul was not there for the voluntary portion, which is all good, but gave Elam some more reps, and now Benford not being here for the mandatory part with an excused absence, I think that gives the kid more and more time to just sharpen his skills. I think we all know there's no lack of talent there. I think it's just a matter of, getting the mental side of it up to snuff and then being in the right place at the right time. So, he's shown glimpses for sure throughout his time here and in the playoffs, even big play against Pittsburgh in the end zone there, making that interception we know. So I definitely think he's on the right trajectory for the safety room. I kind of been clamoring a little bit to see what Justin Simmons could do for us maybe if they did have that extra money, and they would kind of need to spend it all on one guy if they did that. But, I just kind of thought that if Mike Edwards is kind of dealing with something and Simmons is ready to go, you plug him in as early as possible, get him ready to rip. And, he could be a plug and play type player. But it looks like they might just, save that for if an injury pops up and they need something in season or as it gets closer. So, maybe, I guess Edwards is one really the only option that that is very appealing. So we'll see kind of how that rides throughout the off season here. Plenty of time. Obviously, I think guys are going to move around a little bit still, rosters being shaped. So, yeah, no doubt from Joey, I think, great to see if DeMar can contribute to this team. I mean, I have no problem with it. I think a lot of people maybe mistakenly are thinking people are calling for him to be released, and I don't think that's the case. I think people are just saying, like, if he is the DeMar of last year, can we afford to keep that on the roster? Because this roster does have a lot of good players, and I'm not sure that we can keep a guy like DeMar if he doesn't have the ability to really contribute at a high level.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting about this defensive backfield is a good place to start. There's definitely a lot to happen in this position. I mean, Kevin and I talk about this all the time, and he is pro adding a cornerback. And I think that was a very interesting discussion for not only us, but for the entire chat and elsewhere, where he just definitely wants a vet corner in the room. And there's definitely some credence there to where obviously you lost Dane Jackson, Trey White. You definitely had some veteran presence there, like Saran Neal, more of a special teamer, but you definitely lost some veteran presence there. But my counter argument was, well, that's Kyer's spot, right? So now he's stepping up to take that final cornerback spot, as you can see, being a spot starter, instead of really being 5th or 6th on the cornerback depth chart. I mean, he's 4 at the moment, first boundary off the bench, but he's going to push to get playing time. Will they rotate him in at all during the starters? We'll have to see, but I do believe it's still Benford and Douglas's job. And then from there, I mean, I think it's a really good place to have Elam, and the safety battle is just going to be fun. Are they going to roll with Cole Bishop? You'd like to think that Bean was antsy and almost traded up for him. You would like to think that trading up in the second round would signal that, like, hey, we're going to start this guy next to Rapp. So that is definitely a pretty cool note. And Mike Edwards has always been used to that third safety role, and he kind of excels at it. And I would base his contract would kind of prove that too. That's kind of what the Bills were thinking. And then DeMar, I mean, he's still there pushing for that fourth safety job and make the roster. D. Delaney was an interesting signing, has some starters capabilities, and does have some good talent. So it's going to be a fair push all offseason to see, does D. Delaney get in front of DeMar Hamlin for that fourth and final safety role? That's going to be a pretty interesting battle. And what's going to happen behind all these guys? Like, right, we've talked about the big names, but you're only a player or two away from needing to see. Hardy has made some plays here as the backup nickel. I mean, you have, basically behind that, you got Cam Lewis, wherever you want to consider position that he plays. And you don't have a ton else there at the corner spot, Jamarcus Ingram. So, I mean, that's where Kevin would jump in and say, like, hey, they need to add a body here. I want to get your opinion on that as we head into the offseason. Obviously Micah Hyde's still poking around. You could go that way, but do you see any moves in the secondary? That does seem to be the place they could possibly add with some of that money.
Yeah, and I actually was on the show talking with Kevin when we first brought up the post-June 1st moves, and we were talking about the cornerbacks, and he was bringing up Patrick Peterson. I brought up Steven Nelson, but then he retired, and I just, I have a affinity for him because he's got the same last name as me, if I'm being honest. So,
I mean, that's fun.
But
you played good too.
Fun. Yeah, it is. I always loved when David Nelson was on the team too. But hey, what are you gonna do? You don't see too many Nelsons in the sports, so I like it. But
that's great.
Yeah, I didn't even mention really Cole Bishop when I was talking there. I think that I thought of him more as switching on and off with Rapp or being more in the box, but I guess he was in the combine listed as a free safety, so if that's the way they want to take him and Mike Edwards is missing time, Cole Bishop's definitely a guy who then can see some he could use the time and he'll see an uptick in his reps. I think that would be good for him, getting just as many reps at free safety as strong maybe. So that'll be interesting to see what they want to do with him, where they want to utilize him, how they want to utilize him. Seemed like he might be useful in the box, but if they wanted to try him out and see what he can do at the free safety, that'd be good. As far as corner goes, yeah, I think, it's just a lot of uncertainty outside of the top four there. You have Hardy and then, UDFAs and young guys, Jamarcus Ingram. I think some people are like, really, oh man, you're sleeping on Jamarcus Ingram. Some people are kind of like sleeping on Jamarcus Ingram. So I think depending on how you feel about him, that could be a potential. But, adding a veteran presence that maybe is like has that high floor, or what you're going to get from this guy, kind of as a safety net, I think that'd be wise. But I don't know, man. I don't know who exactly is out there that you're going to get. Patrick Peterson's there. I know the other names are not anything that I'm certain about in my opinion, but I'm not going to pretend I'm some defensive back evaluator either. So some of these guys may be good and I just don't know because I've been paying attention to linemen and other places. But
do you see the Bills playing more man-to-man? Yes. I do believe they have transitioned from their corner, their DB coach. That was part of from what I heard inside the team, that part of it was kind of a discrepancy with Elam. Butler did not get the promotion to defensive coordinator. Bobby Babich did. And it is said to be that the team and the general manager has chosen the player. In this case, a lot of people are like, well, McDermott doesn't play his players. He doesn't play his rookies. He doesn't play this. He doesn't play that. He actually listened to his player in this case and said, we want to see more Kaiir Elam. We're going to go a different direction. And yes, I do believe the Bills will play more man-to-man, more press man, setting up for some situations to where you can have some more Kaiir Elam and Rasul Douglas. I think the issue last year in the playoffs specifically were missing a lot of their DBs and linebackers. I mean, Mahomes was able to fully take advantage of the gaping holes in the Bills secondary. There were some miscommunications with Dane Jackson. They scored on a quarters coverage in the deep left third to Travis Kelce was lost, which should never happen. So there was definitely some defensive back miscues. And Butler kind of took that on the chin, basically being in line to maybe have that defensive coordinator promotion. Really, Babich being a new and fresh face and really always having all pros around him, he got the promotion, and the Bills were like, we're just going to go in a different direction. So I really do think that the Bills play some more press man, some more man-to-man coverage, and really utilize the skill set of Kyrie Elam. Because look, AJ Epinesa was a pretty big failure through a couple of years in his career. And then got re-signed, was a very useful player. I see a similar trajectory for Kyrie Elam, and at a more, you could say at a premium position, defensive end is too. But, it is a premium position. The Bills are going to take every account to make this work rather than trade him and get into a Teller situation to where he's now an all-pro at offensive guard for the Cleveland Browns. So I think that that's going to be the most interesting development here is what happens out of these DBs. And I think that's the freshest faces. And yeah, Jim, he probably did help keep Kyrie Elam in the room as well. So that's going to be fun to see how that defensive back unit plays out.
How many years do you think you have to give guys too, like before you see like who they are, or you kind of when do you say, okay, this is what the player is versus like, no, like there's been things throughout the first few years and we still got to let them have a run here because we still think that they haven't reached their level yet. So what do you, I want to talk about that a little bit later, but I think that it bodes well now as well with Kyer of like, all right, we've seen him a couple years now. We've seen, like I mentioned, some flashes there where he can be successful, but how far do you go before you say this is what the player is, or, no, there's still room and we're going to take him to another level?
That's a really good question. One I've actually thought about myself when it comes to multiple players, but I think you have to assume that I'm in the camp of 3 years. At the end of the third year, if there's nothing there, I think that that's a fair time to move on from a player, generally speaking. Certain instances, maybe because the transition and the Bills are trying to make him work, he'll get that fourth year. I would assume that's probably true at this stage. I think you go one of two ways this year. He's very useful, and you absolutely lock him up and need him for next year in his fourth year, or that this is it. So I think you could go probably either way with that conversation. I don't believe he'll have his fifth-year option picked up. And I mean, he could. It's not out of the realm of possible. It's not totally lost. But I do believe I'm a 3-year guy. I think at that stage, I think you can generally tell he's going to be fairly cheaply signed next year. If he is productive enough to even keep him in that fourth corner role, that's fair. I mean, I guess that's what you'll get out of him. But I'm still thinking like, you give him the year 3, unless he's pretty poor to the point where you're not playing him any, like you just can't put him on the field. I do believe he gets year 4, but I'm in the 3-year camp, Lance. Where do you stand with not only Elam, but in general, how long you would give a player, in a similar circumstance?
Yeah, I like to give at least 3, but I guess it's obviously, I think the easy answer is it's going to be case by case. What you did say that really, but in general, yeah, 3 is probably good with me. And sometimes it depends on the position because, if it's running back, which I want to talk about a little bit later, and I'm not seeing anything year 1, year 2, then it's kind of like, man, we can get something somewhere else. It's, we got to move on. But they've had success with bringing some of these defensive linemen and defenders specifically along and having it click for them later and later. So year 3 and sometimes year 4 now. AJ Epinesa, I think, was kind of more year 4 when he really came on, right? Before he really thought that, last year when we really thought, hey, he can really make an impact on a game, and we saw him have that tip interception and things like that. Like that was a big play we hadn't seen out of AJ before. And, now that kind of puts him on the map of like, yeah, this dude can really contribute to this team. And some people even thinking it's AJ and Greg Rousseau as the starting edges if Von Miller doesn't return to being able to be a starter. So,
yeah, I mean, I think by all accounts, we've seen Vaughn look good. I know everyone's saying it's been backups. I have high hopes for him to return to form and what he's going to be able to do. But yeah, I mean, it's a pretty deep unit. And I still believe that the Bills are better on the defensive line than at face value. There's definitely some really good talent, and Kevin and I have broken down some of it. Like I like Javon Solomon a whole lot. I think he's going to come in and add a nice little piece. Smoot, it was an underrated signing, a guy that's always been fairly productive to me, is an upgrade from what you had there last year on the back of the unit in terms of Shaq Lawson You have Casey Toohill as well to come in and compete, who's always been a 5-6 sack guy. So that's going to be a pretty interesting battle from a couple of middle-aged players, a vet, and then young player in Solomon. So, and then obviously you have Kingsley Jonathan. So you have, a couple of different looking players there. And I think that that's going to develop into a pretty good defensive end unit. But yeah, to kind of cap off the corner and safety talk, it is an interesting unit. I like how hard he's being able to ball. I think that he's going to be a nice addition in the back of this rotation, as well as be, a returner in the new return roles. So I think he was actually a very nice pick there on day 3 by Brandon Beane. I think he'll get utilized more than people think, may turn into one of those deeper sleepers with what he's able to do in the return game. And I think he's really going to be Taron Johnson's main backup. The Bills have struggled there if Taron's out, not only long-term, but on a play-to-play basis. They've kind of struggled there with trying to find Serain Neal, trying to see what they're going to do at the backup nickel spot. And it just hasn't worked out for him. So not to say that's a huge position that you need to have a backup nickel, but it does certainly help to have a guy that you can develop behind Taron Johnson, especially if it dinged up a little bit. Taron Johnson plays hard. So if he gets dinged up, like we kind of just pass by the fact that he is a pivotal starter on this defense. He needs a backup too. And it kind of goes unnoticed a lot of times when you're throwing in Serain Neal and others in a pretty important position. So he's been a dominant nickel in his college career. We'll see if it translates to the NFL. His size is the reason he fell, because it certainly wasn't anything as measurables, or what he's able to do is just simply height. So we'll see what he's able to do with the athletic department and more. But kind of transitioning a little bit to linebacker first to kind of talk about this Bobby Babbage unit, that the unit that he got a promotion from. You see Terrell Bernard kind of entrenched as a vet starter, but kind of next to him, the Bills have totally upgraded this linebacker room. A lot of them have been out here in the spring. I would anticipate most of them back very shortly in late July. Are you excited about this linebacker unit? Like it seems to have a huge step up from the RV situation of AJ Klein last year. Are you feeling good about these upgrades from Olafoshio, the rookie? You have Dorian Williams coming into his second year, so a couple of younger players there. But then you have Morrow there. You have Deion Jones, who's been a guy who's been productive, and especially in coverage in this league.
Deion Jones was a really good signing, I think.
What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, Olafosio, the draft pick, rookie, was, it seems like he's going to go right away into a special teams role at a minimum. It seems like he's perfect fit with his size and speed to step right in, get some experience on special teams at first, and then see what he's got on the defensive end as well. But you have, veterans that you bring in. Nicholas Morrow now. Dorian Williams has more years under his belt. I really do like that, along with, like I said, Deion Jones. Now you have guys, hopefully, that are you're deep. It's at 6-7 deep now at linebacker.
Yes, sir.
So if people are going down, and one of the things I was thinking of as you were talking about the defensive backs too, the way that they play just hard-nosed football, that's one of the reasons why I'm not sure Micah Hyde coming back is such a great idea for his own safety, because he plays that same brand of football as the rest of the defense there, as they're asked to do, and really, sticking his neck in there. And it just, it seems like his body is, taking a toll from that. And you hope that, whatever decision he does make, it works out in the best for him. But the linebackers, Milano back on the field is such a great sight, right? Just seeing him doing individuals at least and things like that. And then Bernard seemingly fully healthy now, coming back into his sophomore starting year. So we'll see. Really seems like there's no breaks there, all gas for Bernard to go forward and take that next step and be communicating. I think he talked about a little bit where, other guys like Dorian Williams were getting a chance to show how much they can communicate, with Milano out. And he was impressed by some of these guys coming in and being on the same wavelength as him, and being able to communicate and make the calls at the same time, or even before he would have made them. So I think that when he mentioned that in his presser the other day, that was a really cool thing to hear, that, some of these guys are getting it quick and coming in and able to kind of have a little bit of mastery on the calls and the defense here.
I'm very excited to see some of these linebackers with what Bobby Babbage has been able to do with young players on this defense. That's why he got this promotion. Look, he's a really good communicator. He's young and aggressive. He seems to play the role. Probably if teams continue to hire defensive head coaches like they did this cycle, He's going to put himself into position underneath McDermott. He's definitely going to be in that position because he's a great communicator. So he's not going to have that issue in interviews that maybe some other positional coaches do have. Everyone's going to say, well, you're just kind of following McDermott. Like Leslie Frazier was unable to kind of find suit behind McDermott. But what's going to be interesting is Babich is going to have in his back pocket, like, I've worked with some of the best. I've developed some all pros in my units. And I'm really excited to see him with Dorian Williams. He had him last year, obviously, but Olafoshio is going to be fun. Deion Jones, Nicholas Morrow. This unit I would have loved to have last January in the playoffs because the Bills went out and said, without spending huge money, the Bills basically said, yeah, that unit was not good enough. It was a total tire fire behind the two starters. Once Milano went out, it was an absolute mess. Dodson, played well, and that was once again due to Bobby Babich Jr. In my opinion, went out and got a fairly decent sized contract. But behind that, you have the interesting part. I mean, Spector has shown out, but he's just always hurt. But I'm interested to see what Olafoshio and specifically Dorian Williams, and then the two vets in Morrow and Deion Jones. That's a really good unit. So I think it was one that turned from a weakness come last January, like literal, probably the worst unit on the team, to toward the top. So I'm very excited to see Bobby Babich, Deion Jones development, or what he can do in his kind of coverage style unit and his cover two system / press man. So I'm very interested to see that combination, like you mentioned with Deion Jones. He has been productive in pass coverage in his career. So that's going to be a fun compliment. And then Nicholas Morrow has been pretty underratedly decent. Definitely two players that would have traded for if I could have at the end of last year. So really excited for this linebacking core.
Seems like one of them are going to have to be able to stick on the practice squad if they want to stick around here. And I don't know if that's more Valen Spector or if it's a Deion Jones that kind of goes there to try to stick around. And then, as things happen or whatever, maybe get brought up from the practice squad. It'll be interesting in a lot of different positions who they can get onto the practice squad. And who, chooses to maybe move on instead of going to the practice squad.
I think it's going to be Spector, man. Like, that's just, I mean, he could have a good preseason. He seems to do that, have pretty good preseasons, but he's just never healthy. The Bills are probably going to think at the linebacker spot, they're going to be able to sneak him onto the practice squad. The money they gave Morrow would signal to me they're thinking he makes the roster. Obviously, Dorian Williams, Van Milano, Terrell Bernard, or Locks, Olafoshio, I don't see them cutting. I mean, there's not a ton of capital there. If he really struggles and the Bills think they can sneak him on the practice squad, that's not crazy rationale. But I do believe he makes the roster. So that means that you're going to sneak Valen Spector on, and you're probably going to go heavy at the linebacker spot this year. If you have to make some inactives, you have to have inactives anyways. They're probably going to take from other positions to make sure that Morrow and Jones, Williams and Olafoshio behind the starters, you're gonna probably roster 6 this year and put Spector on the practice squad. That's kind of where I'm at. Do you see, that's probably the most likely path? I think the DBs are fairly clear the path to the roster right now, as long as no ads are made. It's really just D. Delaney versus DeMar Hamlin. Other than that, I think that's set. So one of the battles I have then is really I guess Spector versus Jones. Deion Jones, right? Yeah. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah.
It's gotta be. I mean,
really, will Jones accept the role of being on the practice squad, or, is he gonna say, hey, I'm a vet, so I need to go get my shot somewhere else? Or it's like, hey man, hang out here, give us that vet presence, and you're gonna get your call. Don't worry. The way we play and the way things happen. Look at they're gonna dangle that carrot. Look at last year. AJ Klein was sitting here starting in the playoffs. If you want to play in the playoffs, maybe you can hang out and continue to help us throughout the year on the practice squad. But we'll see. I don't know if Deion Jones. If the ego or the pride of a player is going to say, hey man, I know I can contribute, at least be a 4th or 5th option for someone in the NFL. Let me go try and do that.
Yeah, Nicholas Morrow got a $1.5 million deal with basically most of it guaranteed, $750, most of it guaranteed. The Bills would take a hit cutting him. That's not a crazy amount the Bills could cut him if he really is bad or something. I do believe they believe him to be on the roster. Deion Jones, minimum salary. So the salary there would point to what the Bills, it's not end all be all, but I use that to kind of evaluate what the Bills literally think of the player. They literally think that he is a vet minimum player. The roster needs that. The Bills probably said something like, look at the playoff film. We struggled at this position. You're going to be maybe a top dog behind Matt Milano. And that's, you came in and you've started in your career at times. So this is what it's going to be for you. So I think that he has a strong chance. And I really do think it's Spector to the practice squad. I think that's the initial move. He can play himself onto the roster. He has seemed to have good preseasons. So it's certainly possible, but I do think that he's going to find his way to the practice squad. And there's really not a ton of battles on the defensive side of the ball, in my opinion, Lance. And we're kind of talking about some of them now. You got D. Delaney, who has played a little bit of everywhere in his career. He's going to make a push for this thing. So that's going to be interesting. Absolutely. He has played some corner in his career. He's definitely going to help out with versatility, probably play some teams. He's got some starter capabilities. It's going to be a nice battle between him and Hamlin most of the year. And if they're both good, they could sneak a fifth safety on. They've done it before to sneak that guy onto the roster if they need to steal a spot for there. And then obviously we have Lovely, a nice looking college free agent that's going to battle for a spot this offseason. And then Hardy, to me, is as good as on the roster with his return capabilities. And Cam Lewis, for a special teamer, they've already let go a lot of special teamers so far. So I do believe Cam Lewis is probably entrenched on this roster with the transition with Saran Neal and a couple of other players, Matakevich, et cetera. So I think that he's a fairly solid lock just because of his special teams ability. So there's not a lot of – am I missing something with this back seven linebacker DBs? Is that about –
I was just going to say, the back seven is really solid. I think you kind of have a couple here or there. You mentioned, is Ingram going to make a play to be that last corner as well? Are they, how many corners are they going to keep on the 53? Do they go 6? And if it's 6, then is Ingram the 6th? Or what do you have? Douglas, Benford, Johnson, Elam, Hardy, and Ingram? Or Kyron Brown? I'm not sure if he can push, or one of the UDFA guys there.
Where do you consider Cam Lewis? He's generally listed as a corner now. Where do you?
Okay, I had him in the safety group here. And then so it was Rapp, Edwards, Bishop, Cam Lewis, the 4 safeties I had. But if you got to have D. Delaney there and Lewis instead of Ingram, then I'm cool with that.
There'll be a little bit of transit. You're right. And injuries may play a role here. If someone of any of those units gets banged up, even short, long term, some of those may clear up. But there's not a ton of.
Going to be interesting on the D line, though. I tell you, the front.
Yeah, as we kind of wrap up defense here, let's get into it. We kind of started to dabble at the D end a little bit. AJ Epinesa, Greg Rousseau, Von Miller, locks. Dwayne Smoot, based on his contract, he got more than money than I thought. He's a lock. Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, Austin Johnson, Dwayne Carter, locks. But, behind the first 8, there's probably some jockeying going around for, kind of the 9th spot. Are they going to keep a 10th spot? Deshaun Williams has always been successful in this league as a backup. Casey Toohill as well, Javon Solomon, Cam Klein, Kingsley Jonathan made the roster last year. Gable Stevenson now. Will he make the train? It's a deep unit. What are you thinking about the defensive line?
Yeah, definitely see Solomon's going to be pushing those Kingsley Jonathan, Cameron Klein guys. I think I agree, that they're it's just tough, man. How many do you keep? So do you have Rousseau, Miller, Epinesa, Smoot, and Toohill gives you 5 edge, and then Solomon would be the 6th, and then can you keep 5 D tackles as well? That would be 11 linemen. That gets a little bit tough with the number game, I think, because you definitely would love to have Oliver, Jones, Carter, Johnson, and Williams there available to you. But that becomes a numbers game, like I said, and we'll see. I had 5 and 5 on my initial go at it. With Solomon, I didn't even have Smoot on there yet because I kept Jashawn Williams on the inside. But I think that you could probably guess, like you mentioned, and I'll apologize, I am in Buffalo, so you will hear the train horn in the background maybe, but I guess that's par for the course, right? So, does Smoot get the call over Williams there? They want to keep 6 edge and 4 interior, probably more likely than the 5 and 5 I have, but I just think that the rotation, we'll see. We'll see what Javon Solomon can do throughout training camp to show him, he may be a player where they just need to maybe see if they can kind of redshirt him a little bit and see if they can have him be more of a call up on an as needed basis or maybe a week to week. Uh, we'll see how that works out.
And Smoot's been an interesting point. 6 sacks 2019, 5.5 2020, 6 2021, 5 2022. Gotten a big deal. He's gotten big deals in the past, played exclusively for Jacksonville in his career. And then when it turned around and got 1 sack last year, which led probably to the reduced salary the Bills were able to get him for, but he's always been like a $4 or $5 million player. So it's not like the Bills sank a ton of investment into him. He's kind of your Leonard Floyd replacement without quite the production that Floyd had, but Leonard
Right.
Floyd really struggled against the run. He did struggle. It didn't really show up a ton, but his production against the run is pretty poor. The Bills had to pull him at times during the run, and then in and out of the lineup. They had to play him at times, and Epinesa went out with those ribs, I believe, after an interception. So they've had to use Floyd a little bit more than they would have. But I don't know how much of a true downgrade this is. Leonard Floyd has more established production from the pass rushing capabilities, but Smoot is an interesting player to me because the Bills definitely sunk some money into him that kind of goes unnoticed. Like, he only counts against the cap this year about a $1.5 million, but they gave him $2.5 million.
Yeah.
They actually spread out 4 void years, Lance, for Smoot. So you don't spread out 4 void years without plans that's what they did, basically what they did for Floyd. So they view him as a replacement style player. So, I mean, have you seen much Smoot? Are you excited for him to kind of come in, be a little bit bigger of an addition than we thought right post the draft?
My initial thoughts, yeah, when we did sign him, I'm like, wow, this guy, you immediately think Jaguars, right? That when you think of Dwayne Smoot. And yeah, it's a
Yep.
guy like, man, he definitely had some productivity. Like you mentioned, he wasn't a game wrecker by any means at any point in his career necessarily, but he definitely is a strong presence on the line. I think that strong veteran presence, like I said, now it's just becoming a numbers game because who are they going to be able to roster on the 53 versus who can they have on the practice squad, because they're going to need somebody on this roster to say, hey, like, we're going to need you on the practice squad, and then you can be a call up a few weeks, and as we get thin, as things, again, they're going to reference as things happen throughout the year, if it's going to happen, you're our first guy to call, and come up here. So we'll see how far they can take that with some of these guys, but the depth is certainly impressive. It's not a bad problem to have at all because they, like you mentioned, um, 10, 11 guys that can really make an impact on a team here, and they're going to choose 9 or 10 of those.
Do you have a special player you're watching out of this unit? Are you thinking? I mean, you're a Solomon guy, right? Is that?
But
I
like
guess tell
Javon
me about
Solomon for
give me a
sure.
deep sleeper. Yeah, let me hear about your. Obviously, we can talk about Russo all we want. There's nothing to really say about him at the moment.
Yeah.
So tell me about any guys that you're pushing for. That's that Solomon battle versus Kingsley Jonathan, versus Cameron Klein, versus Casey
Yeah.
Tuhill, a guy that's actually been fairly minorly productive in this league, and the Bills didn't give a big investment to.
Yeah. Hill, when he was playing with um, Sweat and Chase Young, he really was able to be productive because he could just give it his all on the snaps that he got. I see that same uh, opportunity here in Buffalo, so I'm kind of excited about Hill in that role because he really excelled. All of his sacks were had when Sweat and Young were on that team for the Commanders, and when they left and he was getting those reps and he had to play more snaps, he fell off. And so I think being a rotational piece kind of lends itself to help him be most productive. But again, it's a numbers game. So do you keep him? Then you have to think of Deshaun Williams. You have to think of Kingsley Jonathan. Kingsley Jonathan, having played at Syracuse, I've watched him for years now. Being a Syracuse guy, like really enjoyed Kingsley. He came on our network, did a one-on-one with Akeem. So really cool story. But it's like, all right, the production's got to be there from a football standpoint too. Um, so there's always a rooting interest in Kingsley, but I just think that Solomon, under the tutelage of Von Miller and company, is going to be a pretty strong weapon right from the get-go. From a rookie, could come in and play some snaps and be effective. So I really like him. I'm really looking at the interior guys, though. I'm really excited to see, the Dwayne Carter and Austin Johnson behind Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones. I think those guys give us really good depth. But I'm also a little bit nervous about just rolling with four there in the interior. So I kind of would like if they can get 11 guys on the defensive line to fit into the roster. We'll see, but that's going to be tough to do, I think.
Question on did Smoot injure his ACL? No, no. So 2019 he was healthy, 2020 he was healthy, 2021 was healthy. 2022 he tore his Achilles, missed 4 games against the New York Jets. He was forced to miss the remaining 2 games and the 2 playoff games that year from 2022 for the Jags. Missed the first 5 games then of last season, so he was coming off of the Achilles slowly, and that's it takes, as we've seen from some of the Bills players with these ACLs and Achilles, it's going to take a whole season. So that's the Bills are kind of getting him off of that whole missing the playoffs of the Trevor Lawrence year into last year where he missed the first 5 games. But he started on the PUP and then transitioned to the regular season roster. So he should be fully fine as he transitions a pretty final amount away from that injury at this side. But there's not much downside here with this as terms of injury. He's been a very healthy player before that one Achilles injury. And he's already kind of rehabbed it and seen his time missed from that. So the Bills are actually going to get him on the what I would venture to say is the cheap, because Dwayne Smoot's always been a borderline spot starter at a premium position that gets 6 sacks a year. So kind of like look at him like a similar version of like a AJ Epinesa, maybe after he finishes out this contract. And he's kind of in that guise of someone that's been always with one team. And he's kind of been that level of production and got a little bit better as he got older as well. So that's kind of how I view like a Dwayne Smoot. So that's, to me, like it was a bigger signing than most people like to believe because it just happened like quickly right after the draft, and he was kind of coupled in with a couple other guys who were not as big as him, but he's usually on a 2-year $10 million deal. That's like, quite frankly, he's always about a $5 million player. So the Bills have gotten him at half that rate or more. So it's pretty cool to see him in the roster, in the lineup. But yeah, man, I totally agree with you. And on the defensive tackle position, that's one that is going to be fun. They could go with 4 though, Lance. They really could decide that they need to steal from that position, try to stash some guys on the practice squad there. They may have to go with 4 now after the Carter, 4 guys that are going to play a lot, but that may be what they determine to do, and stash that 5th defensive tackle, whomever happens to be. They always seem to have Eli Ankou on the practice squad,
Yeah.
Cameron Klein at defensive end on the practice squad. So those may be 2 names that we should get used to being on the practice squad. But I think that they're unfortunately going to have to steal from DT and only have 4.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I don't envy the calls these guys have to make, and it's tough because you could lose a guy, right? If
Yep.
you risk saying, okay, I need you to go to the practice squad, and it's like I'm gone. I'm not going to do that, or someone else, poaches them there because they have not as much depth at that position. It's roster construction is something that's fun to toy around with, but to be be under the gun at that is certainly, just even thinking about it, not being responsible for it is certainly a little anxiety inducing. And now it's like, fun for us because we get to go and for the defensive line, you really have to wait till they can throw some pads on and really see,
Yeah.
what the production looks like when they're lined up against somebody. It's very tough. That's the tough
Yeah.
thing about June is, it's shorts and t-shirts, but there's still some nice things to see, like who's just understanding things, the IQ of a player can at least show up here.
Give me your final on the defense. We're going to transition. We got to talk about some running back here. Deep sleeper, anyone you think makes the roster as we look at players heading into July, anybody, give me a final name of somebody that's, non-Greg Rousseau.
Yeah. I'll take, geez, I don't know. I'll say for the sake of saying it, picking someone is maybe Kyron Brown can
Okay.
make a jump into the defensive backfield.
Yeah, I mean, it's not crazy. There's definitely a spot to be had. And of all these positions, we're talking about stealing from DT. There's definitely a spot that couldn't be stolen, though, in the cornerback room. So that's not a crazy prediction. I got Hardy being a deep sleeper. He was a draft choice. So, but I do have him, and then him cementing himself as a pretty solid player. He's going to make the roster anyways because of his return ability. But he's kind of my deep sleeper. And I don't think there's a way that you keep Javon Solomon off the roster. So he's definitely going to be a guy that production you're going to try to get to utilize as soon as possible, and at least in the pass rush front as he develops a stop against the run. Hopefully, he can actually take over in that Leonard Floyd role. So we'll see how this all plays out. But got to go to the moneymaker, got to go to the offensive side of the ball for a minute. I don't mean to neglect offensive line, but we got to talk about running back for a minute. Talk a little bit about receiver as we always have to. But at the running back position, you seem pretty interested in, obviously, behind James Cook. These drops have got to stop from James. It's been a problem. I'm well on record of how talented James Cook is, but if you follow me along, he is not my favorite player on the Bills. And it's just because of the lapses, because he has such high end potential. And then you see some of the drops, the fumbles, the miscues that actually really set his team back a whole lot. And especially in those losses, they come back to haunt him. The Bills were lucky to overcome some of the big drops like he had against the Dolphins. And dropped a pure touchdown, Lance. So how are you feeling about him? He's generally considered a top 10 running back, I guess. Like, what is your thoughts there? And then behind him, you have Ray Davis, who was really productive in college with leading all of college football in touchdowns from the running back position receiving. And then Frank Gore Jr. Is he going to make a push? I'm excited to hear your take as we're into June now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's part of you as a fan that was like, man, Frank Gore Jr. The whole story there is great. I mean, the best story is Ray Davis, obviously, what he's
Mm-hmm.
overcome in his life to come through. And Ray Davis could be the starter by the end of the year if things play a certain way. If he comes in and continues that production, is able to be an effective pass blocker like he's predicted to be, and then also catch the ball out of the backfield. If James Cook does have those issues where he's dropping the ball or fumbling in key situations, they may have to look at that. But that's kind of what I was talking about when we talked about how many years do you give a guy. Some folks that I heard talking about James Cook said, like, this is the level you get from him, and like the last year that you saw from him was almost as good as it's going to get. I kind of disagree with that. I think that there is another level for James to take it to, and that level becomes that sure-handed back. If he becomes more sure-handed, and look, there's reports he's dropping stuff. Drop it now. Go ahead. Go out there and drop these balls now and make your mistakes now. And then hopefully when it transitions to the season, you're in a better spot. You've worked on it. You know that it's an issue, and you correct it so that it doesn't cost the Bills points when it comes down to the regular season and the postseason.
Couldn't agree with you more, man. Are you like still a Ty Johnson guy? Do you think he takes running back too, or do you think it's Ray Davis?
I got Ray Davis at running back too, almost like,
Okay.
penciled right in there. I just think Ty Johnson's more effective at RB3, but has that fall forward ability. He just seems to always like be moving forward, and that's what I love about Ty Johnson. So it's no secret, obviously, that Brady really likes Ty Johnson. He brought him right in as soon as he took over and kind of gave him like 3 to 5 touches a game immediately once he took over. So I think he's obviously a good fan of Ty, and so I wouldn't be surprised if Ty Johnson was RB2. I just think that Ray Davis would be better suited for the role as that change of pace kind of typical RB2.
Frank Gore going to push for this roster then? I know he's a good story, but do you ultimately have him going to the practice squad?
Ultimately, I do. I think that Ty Johnson, unless if Ray Davis or Ty Johnson just simply aren't it somehow, I just think, like I said, I think Brady just likes Ty Johnson too much for him not to make the roster. But I don't see a reason why Gore Jr. couldn't necessarily push him. And if he makes it, there's always that one guy in training camp that's going to make us
Hmm.
say, and is Gore going to be that guy this year? We'll have to see. I think maybe Darrington Evans could be another darling of the preseason. We'll see how that works out. But it's going to be interesting between those three with Ty Johnson, Gore Jr., and Evans. I assume having drafted Davis, you're just going to give him a spot. Obviously, he's going to earn it, but I just don't think he's going to be bad enough to necessarily be cut or put on the practice squad. I think he's be good enough. He brings that pass blocking ability and things, I think, enough to warrant the roster spot. But yeah, we'll see. I guess like we said, the drops are one thing for Cook and for these running backs, but it's going to be really hard to tell what they can really do until some pads get on and we can see, how they can break a tackle or, get out of a hole or, bounce from one hole to the next and see what they can really do with pads on and with guys actually bringing them down.
Yeah, it's going to be a good battle. He's going to be, here's what I have penciled in for Frank Gore Jr. is he's definitely going to be a guy that you're going to like in the second half of football games, in the 3 preseason games. He's going to be a guy that probably is going to get a ton of yards. He's going to look, good with Mitchell Trubisky, who probably can run a preseason offense. He definitely can do that. And Mitchell Trubisky is going to know how to use him late in games. I guess it could be even Shane Buechele at that point in the game. We'll see how the rotation works out. But I definitely think he's going to be a guy that has an opportunity more than any other position, like some of these backup defensive tackles. He's going to have a position to get the ball in his hands for like a quarter and a half. That's a
Right.
long time when in a game where the Bills, are going to test Buechele a little bit. He's going to probably get to play a little bit with Trubisky. Maybe they're probably going to bench Cook at points in preseason or a bunch of preseason games. I guess in theory, you're going to, I don't know how much you're going to play Ray Davis. That's going to be the interesting one. How many carries do you give Ray Davis throughout the preseason? You definitely want
And
him
the
going in
depth of the
fresh.
offensive line should really help them too, these running backs. I think that's going to
Correct.
really be a nice feature for them to be able to run behind guys that can move some people.
Yeah, and tight ends too. Like seriously, the backup tight end unit. Like obviously, you're probably not going to play Knox and Kincaid much in the preseason, if at all. Just like the Josh Allen game, I wouldn't play either of them very much. Quentin Morris though knows what he's doing. He's probably going to play a whole lot in preseason. Trey McKitty's been in the league before too. There's not a whole lot to talk about at the tight end room, at least in terms of June. But going to be a top end unit that's also going to help portray and play into the role of this running back position that we see here. And then obviously you're going to have Reggie Gilliam in there, definitely getting some snaps, and he knows how to lead block. So you're definitely going to get some benefits of probably playing a lot of inline I formation maybe. And he's going to inflate his stats potentially. And he's probably going to be liked by a lot of people. And maybe that even turns into enough of like, just roster the guy. So there's definitely going to be some fun games instead of like watching nobody. Like you're going to probably be tuned into do they play Ray Davis, and if not, you're going to get some Frank Gore Jr. Late in games. And I really hope they don't steal some of his carries to give him to Darrington Evans. So we got to kind of see how this all unfolds. But you mentioned offensive line, and real briefly on the offensive line, super deep unit. They're returning 5 of the returning top 6 guys, 5 of now starters, obviously losing just Mitch Morse. Obviously the center McGovern switch. Now you got David Edwards, who was basically entrenched in the offense last year anyways throughout points of the game. And you're still returning Ryan Vandemark, Alec Anderson. So you're really returning like close to 7 out of the top 8 players minus Mitch Morris. And I guess Ryan Bates is in there too. So 7 of 9 of their returning offensive linemen. So like that's a pretty good turnover position. And you're adding Cedric Van Pran Granger, who's a lock, and Lyle Collins, who's a lock. I mean, that's your 9 offensive linemen, and then a chance for someone like Tylen Grable or Keaton Bills or Will Clapp, who's been called out a bunch of times by Brandon Beane, to make the roster as the 10th, and Kevin Jarvis to make the roster as like the Richard Garage as the final. You're right. It's a deep unit, and the unit 2 is pretty deep. It's at least preseason deep. It's definitely some players on there that in past bad offensive lines you may start, especially in like Lyle Collins, Cedric Van Pran Granger, maybe start in different years. Ryan Vandemark has proven to be a really solid rotational, transitional tackle. Offensive line, there's not a ton of talk about. I mean, there's really just a solid unit, a pretty much standard number 9, 1 through 9. And then if they're going to roster a guy like Keaton Bills or one of their draft choices, Richard Garage, you can throw in there, Will Clapp. Is that kind of how you view offensive line? It seems to be like they got deeper. there
Yeah.
as well, but it's a solid unit.
Yeah, and just only thing with the offensive line I wanted to say really was just the comments with Connor McGovern today, really saying like, hey, I'm naturally a center and I'm
Yep.
getting back to that natural position. So I think including myself, we weren't sure, there was a question there a little bit of like, all right, well, who are your best five linemen? Are you better off with Cedric Van Pran Granger at center and Connor McGovern at guard, or do you really give Connor McGovern the center role? And he was saying he was kind of helping Mitch with stuff last year, even. So it looks to me, based upon those comments, that he's definitely going to be cemented in here as that center. So I think um, it's a little bit exciting because then that does give Granger some time to develop behind him, maybe a 2 year development period before they have to decide what to do with McGovern as far as a contract goes. He's 27 now. So yeah, you got this year and next year where you're probably not going to take on that dead cap 11.8 this year, 7.74 next year. You're going to
Yep.
roster McGovern as your center for 2 years now, and then it going into his 29-year season. You have to evaluate where you're at. Still some dead money there, 4.8 and 29, but we'll see kind of how that works out. Um, Down the road. So I think definitely we're going to see 2 full years, barring injury or some sort of collapse, um, from McGovern at the center position.
Very well could be their future center, and I think that was always the plan. The money they gave him was always like a little bit more than I thought. It was like he was a pretty good guard. He was a rotational guy in Dallas. He definitely was pretty good part of the of their pretty decent offensive line in Dallas. But back to his days in college where he actually had some starts at center, like it's going to be an interesting battle to put him at center, and then the guard battle really is, I guess, at left guard. But I mean, it's David Edwards. I mean, they kind of gave him enough
Yeah.
money to be a starter.
Yeah.
But behind that, like I'm pretty excited, like just as much about this offensive line unit as I am the starters. Like I like Vandemark a lot. I think he's developed as a really decent swing tackle. I really like Lyle Collins, at least as a backup with that vet presence.
Mm-hmm.
Alec Anderson has some dog in him from his UCLA days. Really solid, developed player who really fought his way onto the roster last year and now is kind of entrenched, kind of in that Ryan Bates role.
Right.
So really cool to see that development take place. From those three, and then they have a couple of talented rookies there that I really like. Obviously, they're probably going to put in the roster exemption for Travis Clayton. I don't see how he makes a team, but I always liked Richard Garage. I thought he played well last year. Will Clapp has started at center in this league, so if they need that center depth, Keaton Bills was a pretty highly sought after UDFA, just like Frank Gore Jr. So he's got a chance at this thing. And then, that's not even including Van Pran Granger, who's definitely an SEC all pro college level top center of all of college football, who I had in a late second, early third. I didn't talk too much about Van Pran Granger because I didn't think the Bills would take him in day two. I was kind of looking at more of those developmental guys. He's a step better than the center that I thought the Bills would take. About the range, I thought they'd take it, but the player I thought is a step better than what I expected to have here. So he definitely plays a role in this.
Yeah. My absolute favorite draft pick of the entire draft was
I
Van Brand
mean,
Granger. So
if let's spitball that just for a minute before we have to get to nothing to talk about with QB, obviously, with Allen working on some of his mechanics. But as we talk about this for a second, we have Connor McGovern playing center. Where like probably long term, as you just said, where is the opening for Van Pran Granger, not only this year, but in the future? Does he have to fight off David Edwards at left guard? Obviously, he's going to be your first interior guy, I think. Him versus Alec Anderson's an interesting battle, but tell me about it. Like, he's your favorite draft choice. Where's the opening for him? Because the Bills are pretty young and have a lot of contracts with long terms left on them at this position group.
right, yeah, you got I got Dawkins, McGovern, Torrance, Brown, Edwards. You got Vandemark and Lyle Collins, obviously. You're going to have Alec Anderson on the interior. And then I'm looking at Van Pran Granger. I know Kevin Jarvis there, obviously, and Will Clapp, the veteran guys that are going to get a look. But, I just see him obviously as the backup center. So it's going to be again, the numbers game is pretty insane looking at it, but I just feel like you got to have him. Um, like I don't know why you would pick him if it's not something because they're always thinking ahead. They thought ahead with McGovern. They thought about this scenario. This wasn't an accident that Mitch Morse was let go and they did all this stuff with the cap this year. They had an idea when they signed McGovern of like, okay, right now he doesn't fit in, but he can play left guard. Let's see what we can get out of him this year, and then we're going to move him this. Like, there was always the plan to move him to center. Nobody knew it, but they're not. They're a lot smarter than people might give them credit for. I believe Brandon Beane certainly. Um, and so that's where I see him. I just think that you almost need to give him a roster spot because, you know, he's probably not going to last on the practice squad unless you're protecting him every week. And it's tough because then that's basically your ninth offensive lineman there.
I agree, man. That's a great unit. I'm really looking forward to it. Yep, Tommy Doyle. We didn't talk about Tommy. He did pass through waivers. Friend of the show, Tommy Doyle, just like Kingsley Jonathan for you guys on the network. But here as well, we've had Tommy Doyle on a couple of times on our show, and he's a friend of the show. So definitely hurt to see that. He just couldn't fight that final injury, and a couple of them, or the two major injuries, weren't really his fault. Like he had a defensive lineman pushed into him in preseason last year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean,
So
that
my
could happen to
understanding is
any of us.
he'll spend the year on IR, but still rostered by the Bills.
Correct. Yep.
So
And that's going to be the hope, and he gets some type of guaranteed pay that way. I think the way that it breaks down per the CBA, if you agree to that now, I think that he gets a heightened pay from the way that I interpreted it, and we'll see if he's able to make a career out of it next season. But yeah, he wouldn't be a guy. But we have to talk about receiver before we wrap the show, Lance. It's definitely a position I wanted to get into before we close here at quarterbacks. Nothing to talk about there. We'll see if Bouchel can, Brandon Beane mentioned looking at interested at Shane Bouchel, but talk about receivers right now and the Justin Shorter drops. I don't know if he'll ever put it together. Chase Claypool on the come up. You had that scare with Shakir, but he's fine, which is great. Obviously, we all know about how Coleman's been looking so far. It's been looking great in shorts. As into Curtis Samuel's not going to really flash anything really until he gets some pads on and his versatile and speed. What are you feeling about this receiver, MVS? Like talk to me a little bit about now that we've seen them work with Josh a little bit. How you feeling?
it's one of those things. I was like, man, they could keep 7 receivers, but it's
Yeah.
just the numbers game. Where do they steal that spot from? Because it's like you are taking away a linebacker or a defensive back or an offensive lineman, or are they gonna have to part ways with like Reggie Gilliam and use Knox more in a fullback role at times? If they want to utilize, um, the 12 personnel, but not roster a fullback. I don't know, it's going to be a tough call that they're going to have to make. It seems like they're deep with receiver right now. They don't have necessarily that number one, but they got like 3 to 5 guys that can be that wide receiver 2 through 4 type of thing. So it's like, you know, um, cool to see Chase Claypool's name being mentioned a ton right now. I think that you kind of root for that guy to come back and was productive. It's not like he never was productive. I think he was maybe a product of the system, but this system could be good for him as well. Talked a lot about having to be on special teams, so kind of spoke the language of trying to make a roster. I think that he knows that being just a wide receiver maybe isn't necessarily going to get him on the 53, so he has to think that way a little bit. We'll see how that actually pans out. Um, Obviously, thinking Samuel, Shakir Coleman, with MVS and Hollins as the core 5 there. And then you have Claypool with the Shavers, Isabella Hamler, and shorter guys as trying to figure out if there's going to be 6 or 7. Haven't heard a ton about Keys or Xavier Johnson yet. Brian Thompson had a good play today, from what I understand, so that was nice to hear. A guy who was on the practice squad last year and seems like he's got a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
so I think that was from Bouchel, actually, that pass to Brian Thompson. So, uh, Hamler seems like, he's a pure speed guy, and I'm not sure that that one-dimensional type receiver has a path to this roster. If he can accept the role in the practice squad, I like that. But
Yep.
Shorter out seems like he's having a hard time hanging onto the ball right now as well. So seems like he's not really separating himself right away. And it looks to me like your six could be Coleman, Samuel, Shakir, Hollins, MVS, and Claypool.
Yeah, we had Stevie on the show last week who mentioned, really liking what Mac Hollins could do. So I thought that was really interesting perspective from him. He likes him as a player and his ability, especially with a quarterback like Josh Allen, and then his special teams ability too. So it's going to be fun. Like really across the board, beside Diggs, like every other position was upgraded across the receiver room. So that's tough to say. You can't just take Diggs away and be like, hey, they upgraded everything else. I mean, they
Yeah,
did, but also they're going to have to come up with the production for Diggs because 2 through 7 is upgraded.
yeah.
But they do have that hole at 1. But how is that going to transition with all the upgrades from, let's just say they keep 6? That's where I'm at. You're going to upgrade 2 through 6 are all going to be plus 10%. But does that make up for whatever Diggs was giving you throughout the season last year? That's what remains to be seen from this unit. But I think that as of right now, I have a similar 6 to you. I mean, obviously I think Keon Coleman's your receiver 1, right? I mean, is that kind of how this is going to go? I
I think
think
by year end, I think for sure. I
definitely.
think he's coming up to him, but he's been nothing short of everything the Bills could want from their first draft pick of the year. He's not a first rounder, but the first draft pick of the
Yeah,
draft
that's
this
gonna
year.
suck his whole career. I'm
Um,
always gonna say that, and I'm
yeah,
always gonna be wrong. But he's their first round pick. Like they Bills just
yeah,
got a little bit of sugar for taking him 33 instead of 32, or really even go take it a step further when their original draft choice at 28. So
yeah.
like,
Yeah, and Mac, just a point, the last point on Mac Hollins, I don't want to interrupt too much before you make your last points or whatnot, but uh,
yeah,
you look at Gabe Davis last year. I mean, I think I counted he had like 7 games with 1 or 0 catches and stuff like that. So you don't necessarily need Mac Hollins to be uber productive with catches and yards. He's going to play a role in that offense to where, if he's out there doing his uh, job with blocking and things of that nature, that it's not going to be really much different than having Gabe there as long as he's, as strong of a blocker and can really be productive in that way. Because like I said, Gabe Davis, as much as he might have commanded attention, and maybe some of those lack of targets and catches were because he was taking attention away from someone else, I still think you still have Hollins there who can be as productive, if not more so, in the blocking game, but then maybe doesn't give you uh, the receiving capability that Davis has. Maybe he does. I mean, I guess I'm not a huge Mac Hollins guy. I've not watched a ton of him in my life, but I just think that's why maybe 6 or 7 receivers can be kept, where you can
yep.
plug another guy in there to do the receiving part of it, and Hollins will be, good enough to do the diligence, I guess, of what that position needs to be in this offense.
Yeah, and to kind of wrap that point up, like basically, if you look at it, like Mac Hollins is an upgrade from Trent Sherfield, Curtis Samuel
Right.
is an upgrade from Hardy. You still have Shakir, he's still on the roster, so he already counts. But then Keon Coleman to Gabe Davis upgrade there. So those are a couple of differences that you have on the roster. But yeah, I mean, I'm really looking at the Hollins, most notably here, the Hollins upgrade and the Curtis Samuel upgrade from Hardy and Sherfield, because those players did play last year. They needed to come in at stretches last year when Gabe was out, especially in big time, and just didn't produce. Like, just did not produce. I mean, yeah, Sherfield had a deflected catch, which was kind of a fluke, good catch by him. But outside of that, really did not make another play the rest of the season. Deontay Hardy had a couple plays here and there, big punt return, good for him. Same thing. He just did not make enough plays to justify, especially his pay. So I think that those two upgrades there are huge. And then will Coleman be an upgrade from Gabe Davis? Well, that's what the jury's out on. Remains to be seen. what they're able to do with ball control in terms of will he come down with these contested catches that Gabe Davis was good at. Now his catch rate was 50% because he was going up against some of Josh's contested catch. Everyone would be like, he only caught 50% of the balls because Josh threw him contested catches and it all of his back foot and on the scramble drills and with players in his face.
His feet on the sideline.
His feet on the sideline, like so much stuff from Josh. Like not fair to judge Gabe Davis on his catch rate because Josh Allen would literally throw the ball. There is like a whole montage that I've seen made where Josh is literally throwing it into outer space, hoping Gabe Davis comes down with it. Not to say he didn't have a bad drop or two in his career, because he certainly did, but he was kind of utilized in that role for Gabe specifically. So I'm excited to see what Keon can do on the upgrade of that position. And then, I got Chase Claypool on the roster this minute. I think that talent, it's not like he's some dude UDFA that, everyone's like, oh, even like Frank Gore Jr., like this dude was productive with Big Ben Roethlisberger, a guy that's been comped to Josh Allen, at least from an arm talent perspective, the majority of his career. Obviously Josh has the elite running ability on top of that and maybe a little bit more physically dominating as well. But like from an arm talent perspective has been judged to Ben Roethlisberger and was super successful in that style of offense. So I think the Bills have high hopes for what they're able to do from these 6'4" receivers. And I'm excited to see it, Lance. I'm here to see what this receiving core turns into, but I have Chase Claypool on the roster as of today. I do think he'll beat out Shorter. The Bills will want to stash Shorter on. He is a perfect practice squad player with him and Shavers. That's kind of what I have going on in the practice squad, and they may even try to stash Isabella down there if they want. But that's kind of where I have this developed outside of full health. Do you have a deep sleeper on offense, Lance, to leave us off with?
On offense, I think, if I can say Van Prang Granger, on the line, because we talked through and there's not a clear cut spot for him, but I think he does find his way on the roster because I just don't think you can really count on stashing him on the 53. And then, no, I mean, I really think that Claypool is that kind of that last receiver that makes the roster here. And I'm not sure he's necessarily a sleeper, but I think I agree that he does make it. I just, the Shavers, Isabella, Hamler, Shorter guys, I don't really see them making it. I don't really see them having enough versatility to be able to claim a roster spot here unless they keep 7.
Yep, I agree. And lastly, like the Bills always seem to have not a deep sleeper, but a sleeper potentially make it on the offensive line. You had Alec Anderson, Ryan Vandermark. I don't think anybody had him on most of their roster predictions this year as you approach training camp. But as you take it into the most recent training camp coming up next month, I think they're probably going to be a surprise offensive lineman make the roster. I mean, I guess Tylen Grable was a literal draft choice. He can make the roster, but I think Keaton Bills is a guy that the Bills could turn to and see like him make the roster as well. Will Clapp make it? But I do think that there's going to be an ability for one of these sleeper offensive linemen. There's no real sleeper at the receiver position because we talk about him all the time. There's really not like a guy we're sleeping on at this moment because the second that guy pops up, we'll be talking about him ad nauseum.
I guess if Xavier Johnson comes through and can do something, then he would be a sleeper. It's hard. I mean, he's kind of one of those guys where he was sort of highly sought after UDFA, I believe, as well from the receiver position, and the Bills grabbed him. One of the first UDFAs they signed, or one of the first ones that were reported at least. So
there's something to that sometimes. And then you got Shavers and Brian Thompson, a couple of guys where doesn't take much to keep 7 or to sneak. I don't think they will. I think they've only kept 7 for a moment in time underneath McDermott. So like,
I don't see how they could. They have to get rid of Gilliam.
They got to hope they can get him on the squad.
Yeah,
they got to hope they can get on the practice squad. That's their hope with those guys. But not to say that one of them can't win it out, but it would probably take a really good camp and an injury, unfortunately, for most of those guys. Really good camp and an injury or two. But things happen. So it's not a crazy prediction to think that one of those guys could sneak on, especially if someone like Shavers or Brian Thompson can add a special teams ability. That drastically increases their likelihood for the 6 receiver spot. So
time with the system is there, so they definitely have the ability to
those two
have that high IQ with what this team wants to do. Now there is maybe a little shift with Brady coming in, so you don't know exactly how quickly they'll pick up his nuances, but doesn't sound like it's going to change a whole lot because he's going to do what they're good at from what he said in his conferences. So.
Yeah. And well, we really appreciate everybody tuning in for an hour and 10 minutes here of the show. Like, really good to break down in the spring and see how all of our talks and conversations. We'll revisit this at some point in August to kind of see how we did, see if we were on page, see if we were totally off base, and kind of revisit some of this conversation because it was a fun one. And always thank you to our show sponsors at Summit Center and Larson Timko Funeral Home and Dave Dengler over there for sponsoring the show. It always means a lot to us. Smash the like button, helps the entire network, helps us. We've been growing crazy here on the YouTube subscribers. So if you're on YouTube, hit us on the follow. Anybody that's not, if you could hit us on the follow on YouTube, that would mean the world to us. And Lance, what do you got going on? You have your show coming up. What else is working?
Yeah, triple coverage on Friday nights.
Yep.
We're going to be over at the Buffalo Go Classic Golf Tournament. So if you haven't done so yet, head on over to the Buffalo Go website, get your squad entered, your foursome entered for the Buffalo Go Golf Classic on June 7th or July 7th, excuse me, coming up. It's a great time. Stevie Johnson was there last year. Not sure if he's coming again this year, but great time. A lot of hole sponsors come around. Built in Buffalo will be a hole sponsor as well. So we'll be out there, have some content, maybe have some cool giveaways. Last year we gave away an Encore golf bag, Encore Golf. So, definitely come out, check that out. And check out again all the shows on Built in Buffalo, and the social media channels we have. We really appreciate all the support so far. Our social media's been growing and been very good. We're well over 100,000, almost to 120,000 on Facebook. So I really appreciate all the support on those channels and everything.
Appreciate it. And yeah, absolutely. Check out all the shows here on the network. We got the Hoof tomorrow, we got Triple Coverage, we got the Founders Pod. We got so many good shows coming up right in a row here after ours. So really appreciate everybody tuning into those. And leaving you at the
little bit slow on the blog side right now. We're getting that going, but we do have builtinbuffalonews.com. Check that out. Really a good article by our guy Matt Homan was written. Jim Kelly versus Josh Allen discussion. So go check that out.
Nice. Yeah, definitely. Great stuff. And we'll see with Tyler Bass, who had a struggle of a day today. Going to leave you guys with that. Needs to turn it around. Can't miss kicks, important kicks like that for any reason in the playoffs. Yes, everybody says Mahomes would have gone down and won anyways, probably, but he cannot miss that kind of kick. And he has not started off the preseason in a right way. That is somebody that should be excelling right now. We're talking about in pads or not in pads. He is somebody that should be hitting 60-yarders, not missing 35, missing 50, making 50, then missing 40. Like, got to see a correction there soon, coming from the kicker position. So we'll see that as we head into summer. That is definitely something I'm going to leave you guys with that we need to watch out for. Is there a Tyler Bass problem, or someone like Jack Browning come and take the punter kicker kickoff? Like, going to be an interesting player to watch in the training camp as well, to see if he can fight Sam Martin off the job, because there's definitely some injury. If there's any injury problems, he is the only guy on the roster right now behind these guys, and he's behind both of them. So it's definitely going to be fun, but Tyler Bass has got to clean it up, Lance, as we approach
100%.
the summer season. But we thank everybody for an hour and 15 minutes of your time. Please smash the like button. Kevin, Lance, we'll be right back at you next week. Kevin and Kevin will be right back here on the Going Deep Buffalo Show on the Built-in Buffalo Podcast Network and more. So we're looking forward to everybody. See you next week.
Go Bills.